PFAFF 7000 overlocker and cover stitch machine can be set up to sew a cover stitch or an overlock, and at the moment it has been sewing in a 4-thread overlock, and I'm going to show you how to change over to sew a cover stitch narrow. So the first thing we're going to do is rethread the chain looper. So for a cover stitch you need the 2 needle threads and 1 chain looper. So let's go ahead and do the chain looper. So take your thread and place it on the far right thread spindle, and let's open the cover door. So we're going to use this far right pathway for the looper, which is purple, and that's called the chain looper. So the chain looper is the one at the front. So there's 3 loopers that you possibly could thread, but for the cover stitch you only need the chain looper, and that's the looper that's right at the front. So the way to remember which looper is which is to get a clue. So that's C-L-U. So the first looper at the front is C, the second looper is the lower looper L, and the last looper at the back is your upper looper. So get a clue about your loopers. Is an easy way to remember. So let's focus on the chain looper, which is the looper at the front. So to get the machine set up correctly for the cover stitch, you don't want to be using the upper looper. So we're going to turn the wheel until the upper looper is below the bed. So you want it's in that position, and then you can take your lever to convert from overlock to cover stitch, which is position B, and you're going to slide the lever over from sewing to threading. And let's turn the wheel until we lock the loopers in place. So now the chain looper is sealed and we can thread the chain looper up. So let's take it through the same pathway as we always do. So first of all, in the kaleidoscope threader, which is extended, I don't think you can quite see it, there's a first guide on the top. You're going to raise your presser foot, so that releases the tension disc, and do a little bit of a floss, make sure that you're through it. And there's a guide in the bottom. Take, I don't know, about 1 or 2 centimetres and just put it into the hole. You can use your tweezers for this. I'm fine with my fingers. I've got a little bit of extra thread, so it has enough to go through the looper, and here it's gone through. In fact, I'm just going to pull it through. I could have had more to go through the looper. I underestimated how much I needed there. So that's your chain looper threaded, and we are setting up the cover stitch narrow, and we're going to thread up the 2 needle threads. So to get started, you need to open the cover, and then you take the lever across from sewing mode to stitching mode, and that's a safety feature as well, because now you can't sew. So it does come up with a warning saying the cover's open, so you can use the stylus just to get rid of that warning because you've got the door open. And let's start by threading the left needle, which is in position C. So you're going to take it up. The first part of the guide is the telescopic thread guide, and you take it through the first guide at the top, through the tension discs. They're open because I've raised the presser foot. Then we're going to take the thread through there's 3 slots. So imagine my fingers on the slots, and we're going to take the thread through the back slot. Okay, so if you imagine those slots as your fingers, it's the rear slot that you can take it through, and then you take it up through the lever, and make sure it's in that slot, which it is. And then on the spiral guide, it's the far left guide, and then the guides at the back. Again, you've got the sort of finger slots, and it's the far one that you want it in. And then you don't put the thread behind the guide recessed here that you used with the overlock. You miss that guide out. and then you can use your needle threader to thread your needle. So put the thread through the guide, take it down through the shaft, and it just creates a loop behind, and you can just catch that with your tweezers and pull it through. So that's really easy. And again, you do the same again with the needle in position D, and follow the blue path, and again in the slots, position C needle and position D, so it's the second slot in, and then on the spiral guide it's the second slot in, and again it's logical, then you put the thread in the guide next to the previous guide and thread it through the needle. So when you've finished threading, you can take all your threads to the rear. The My Air 7000 has been set up for a Coverstitch narrow, so we've threaded all the chain looper and the two needles for the narrow sitting. So before we close the cover and to get ready to stitch, there's a few more things that we need to do. So all the information for setting up your stitch is actually on the colour screen, and you have a stylus as well that's stored in the cover, so you're easy to navigate around on the screen. So let's have a look at the settings. So everything for the stitch is there. Let's have a look at what we need to do to make sure the machine is all set up for the cover stitch. So here is the pictorial picture of the stitch that you've selected, and on tab 1 you're going to look and see all the indicators of what you need to do to make sure the machine is now set up for cover stitch. So you have first of all an indicator for the cover table. So you've got the cutter cover table on at the moment as if it was set up for a overlock, and that's table A, and it's saying here you want table B. So you need to release this table and you just push down that lever there and it comes off, and then you've got table B, which is there. So you can see they've got two slots there and a slot there, and that's what you're trying to slide into the cover. So if you line up your bottom two slots first, then B goes in, and you can see it's a much bigger cover. You have to lower the cutting blade, so if you were doing overlock you would be having obviously the cutting blade there, but in cover stitch you don't want that. So the blade is here, and if it was engaged it would be at the top, but you want to pull it, the lever towards you, and just turn it 180 degrees and let it slide back in. So that's the blade set up. Here's an indicator about whether you want to, for the upper looper, for when you want to do a 2-thread overlock, and obviously we're not using the upper looper, that's going to be disengaged. There's also the setting to disengage the upper looper, which is B. So here there's another lever that you want to have across at B, which is indicated here, and that disengages the upper looper. This indicates the presser foot pressure, and it says it wants it on N, and there's a dial on the side, and you just make sure that's on N. And then the stitch finger needs to be set to R, and the stitch finger lever is here, so you pull that across to R, and you're just retracting the stitch finger. You don't need it when you're doing cover lock stitch. So that's all set up now for you to be able to close the door. Remember, if you were in threading mode, you need to take this lever across to stitching mode and shut the door, and that's the machine set up. So let's go back to the information on the stitch that we're going to do, and I'll set the camera up a little bit closer, and then we'll have a look in more detail at all the information that's on the colour screen. The PFAFF Admire Air 7000 has a colour screen that gives you lots of information about the stitches that you're selecting and stitching out. So let's have a look at the cover stitch narrow. So the drop down menu across the top of the colour screen tells you which stitch you've selected, and underneath it's going to tell you all the features of that stitch. So you can get a pictorial picture of it, so you can see it's the 2 straight stitch lines, and on the back you've got the chain looper. And typically this is a stitch that's used on the hem, on necklines, on t-shirt materials. It also tells you what needle to use, where your needles should be positioned on the machine. This is the cutting width, but that's not applicable to cover stitch, so there's no cutting width there. This is telling you the speed of the machine, so it can sew up to 1300 stitches per minute, and you can go down or up, so you can leave it at the fastest or lower if you're not comfortable. This is your differential feed, so remember, if you go up, it gobbles up the fabric, and if you go down, it stretches the fabric out a little bit. So delicates, lower settings; heavier or stretchy fabrics, higher setting for the differential feeds. That's a good rule of thumb. And then this is your stitch length, so you can make these stitches, these 2 parallel straight stitches, you can make these longer on this setting. So on the actual tension discs across the thread paths, you've got your 2 needle threads, and then you've got your chain looper as well. So they're all colour coordinated, so it's easy to work out which one you're adjusting. So if you wanted to adjust your tension, you can just select it, and then you go up and down, and of course you can see it's changed colour, so you know you're not at the factory setting. If you want to go back to that, you just go down, and then you can select if you want to change any of the setting discs. So try first as it is, and most times I think you'll be satisfied with the stitch quality, but if there was some extreme fabrics that you were sewing, you definitely could adjust that. So just touch the tension discs again to come back to your information. So on alongside the colour screen, there's an information button, and that can help you toggle to more information about the stitch. And here's a lovely guide of the stitch that you've chosen, showing you exactly what your stitch is going to look like. It's also telling you which threads, pathways you should have threaded. So it's saying the left needle, the right needle, not the upper or lower looper, and the chain looper, so that makes it really clear which threads to thread. Then if you press tab 1, it's telling you how you should set your machine up for your cover stitch. So it's telling you which cover stitch table you should have, B, that you can disengage your knife, that you have it on setting B to disengage the looper, that you don't require the upper looper. It tells you where your foot pressure should be, N, and where your stitch finger should be positioned, and it's on R. So that's easy to set up your machine for your cover stitch. And then this is a nice feature that it tells you exactly where you should be using this stitch and for what fabrics you should use this stitch as well. The PFAFF at my Air 7000 has been set up for a cover stitch narrow, and let's just stitch it out and have a look at that. Let's stop halfway down, and I'll show you how to release the thread. So you raise the presser foot and you do a full rotation with the wheel away from you, anti-clockwise. Pull the thread out. You can see how easily then that comes out, and you've got that cover stitch with the chain stitch behind. And of course, if that was on a stretch fabric, you'd have a lot of stretch without any threads popping, and so that's why you can use them on t-shirts around the necklines and hemlines, and it gives you a great stretch.